He had everything: power, wealth, success. But when he saw his childhood friend sitting on the judge's bench, memories came flooding back. And what he did next left everyone speechless. The grand courtroom was silent as Alexander Pierce stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He wasn't used to being here, not in a courtroom, not in front of a judge. He was a man who owned skyscrapers, not someone who sat in courtrooms waiting for verdicts. But today was different. Today, he wasn't here for business. Today, he was here because of fate. He adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the room with his usual confidence. But the moment his eyes landed on the judge's bench, everything changed. His breath caught. There, in the black robe, seated with authority, was her. Eleanor Hayes, the girl who had once been his best friend, the girl who had once known all his secrets, the girl he had promised he would never forget. And yet, he had. She looked different now, stronger, sharper. Her once playful eyes were now serious, her presence commanding. But it was her. And suddenly, Alexander Pierce, billionaire, business mogul, a man who controlled empires, felt completely unprepared. She hadn't seen him yet, but she was about to. And what happened next would change everything. Alexander couldn't take his eyes off her, the confident posture, the sharp focus, the way she carried herself with quiet authority. This wasn't the same girl who used to race him through the school hallways or sneak out late at night to sit under the stars and talk about dreams. This was a woman who had built something for herself, something powerful. But as he watched her, he felt something unexpected regret. Because the truth was, he had broken his promise all those years ago. They had sworn to stay in touch, no matter what, sworn that no amount of success or distance would ever change their friendship. But life had happened. He had thrown himself into building his empire, working day and night to become the billionaire he was today, and somehow in the process, he had lost the one person who had ever truly known him. And now here she was sitting on the judge's bench, completely unaware that the boy she once called her best friend was standing in the courtroom, watching her in silence. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Part of him wanted to walk away. She had clearly done just fine without him. She had become something great. And maybe he didn't deserve to just walk back into her life as if nothing had changed. But another part of him, a part he hadn't listened to in a long time, refused to let this moment slip away. The bailiff called the court to order, and Eleanor finally looked up, her eyes scanning the room as she prepared to address the case. But the second her gaze landed on him, she froze. For the briefest moment, everything else fell away. Her fingers tightened around the papers in front of her. Her lips parted slightly in shock, and Alexander swore he saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, disbelief. Something else, something deeper. He smirked slightly, tilting his head just enough to let her know he wasn't going anywhere. Eleanor's expression shifted just as quickly as it had changed, the mask of professionalism sliding back into place as she cleared her throat and addressed the court. But Alexander knew her too well. He saw the way she glanced at him again, the way her breath had caught for just a second. She remembered him. And now she was wondering the same thing he was. Why now? Why here? He leaned back in his seat, watching her with quiet amusement. He had come to this courtroom expecting just another business matter, just another deal to settle. Instead, he had found the one person he never should have let go. And before this day was over, he was going to make sure he didn't lose her again. Eleanor kept her expression unreadable as she addressed the courtroom, but Alexander could see it. The slight hesitation, the way she glanced at him between sentences. She was composed, professional, but beneath the surface, he could tell she was just as shaken as he was. He leaned back in his seat, watching her carefully. Memories of their past flashing through his mind. Late-night talks under the city lights, sneaking out of school to watch the sunset on the rooftop. Promising each other that no matter what happened, they would never lose touch, but they had. And now, here they were, years later, on opposite sides of a courtroom. The case being discussed was meaningless to him, just another business dispute that his legal team had insisted he attend in person. But none of that mattered anymore because Alexander wasn't here for the case anymore. He was here for her. The sound of the gavel striking the desk snapped him out of his thoughts. "This court is adjourned," Eleanor announced, her voice steady, but Alexander caught the way she exhaled slightly the moment the session ended, like she had been holding her breath the entire time. He didn't waste a second. The moment she stood to leave, he was already moving, following her through the private exit reserved for the judge. The security guard at the door stepped forward, but before he could stop him, Eleanor's voice rang out, "Let him through." The guard hesitated before nodding, stepping aside as Alexander walked into her chambers, closing the door behind him. For a moment, there was silence, neither of them speaking, just standing there in the quiet space between past and present until Eleanor finally crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow at him. "Alexander Pierce in my courtroom," she said slowly, shaking her head. "I should have known you'd show up somewhere unexpected," he smirked, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Surprised to see me?" Eleanor exhaled, sitting on the edge of her desk, her expression unreadable. "Surprise doesn't even cover it, Alex." The way she said his name made something shift inside him. It had been years since anyone called him that. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Why didn't I know you became a judge?" She let out a dry laugh. "Because you weren't around to know." That hit harder than he expected. "I didn't mean to disappear," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Life just happened." Eleanor's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Yeah, well, life happened for me too." They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them until Alexander finally took a step closer. "I want to fix this," he said simply. "I don't know how yet, but I do." Eleanor studied him for a moment, then shook her head with a small smirk. "You always think you can fix everything, don't you?" Alexander chuckled. "That hasn't changed." Eleanor sighed, looking down for a brief second before meeting his eyes again. "Well, if you're serious about fixing things, Alex, you better be ready for the truth." He tilted his head. "And what's the truth?" She hesitated, then said softly, "You left, and I had to learn how to live without you." His heart clenched at her words, but he wasn't walking away this time. Not now, not ever. Alexander's smirk faded as Eleanor's words settled in. "You left, and I had to learn how to live without you." He had spent years building an empire, making deals, traveling the world. But not once had he stopped to think about the people he had left behind. The people who had mattered. Eleanor had been one of them. Maybe the most important one, and now she was standing in front of him, stronger without him. He took a slow breath, stepping closer, but she didn't move, didn't step back. Just watched him with those same sharp eyes that had always seen through him, even when they were kids. "I know I messed up, Eleanor. I know I should have stayed in touch, but I'm here now, and I don't plan on disappearing again." She let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. "You think it's that simple, Alex? You think you can just walk back into my life after all these years and everything will be fine?" He held her gaze unwaveringly. "No, I don't, but I know I don't want to leave this room without knowing if I still matter to you." Eleanor's breath hitched for just a second, a flash of emotion in her eyes before she masked it with that same unreadable expression she had worn in the courtroom. "What do you expect me to say, that I waited around for you, that I hoped one day you'd show up again? Did you silence?" For the first time since he had walked into her chambers, Eleanor didn't have an answer. Alexander sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Look, I don't expect you to just let me back in. I don't expect anything, but I do want a chance to fix this, to fix us, whatever that means." Now Eleanor stared at him, arms crossed, her fingers, gripping her sleeves like she was holding herself together. Finally, she let out a slow breath. "I don't know if we can go back, Alex. We're different people now." He nodded. "I know, but maybe we don't have to go back. Maybe we start over." She gave him a skeptical look. And how do you suggest we do that? Alexander smirked, his confidence returning slowly. Dinner one night. No pressure, no expectations. Just two old friends catching up. Eleanor narrowed her eyes like she was testing him, trying to figure out if he was serious finally. After what felt like an eternity, she exhaled, running a hand through her hair. You don't give up, do you? Never did. Never will. Eleanor let out a small laugh, shaking her head. You're impossible, but she didn't say no. Alexander took a step back, flashing his signature grin. I'll be waiting for your call. And with that, he turned, walking toward the door, leaving her standing there watching him go. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't walking away for good. He was just getting started. Eleanor sat on the edge of her desk, watching as Alexander walked out of her chambers like he hadn't just turned her entire world upside down. Her heart was pounding, but she refused to show it. He was the same as he had always been. Bold, confident, completely reckless with her emotions. She had spent years telling herself that he was just a part of her past, that she had moved on, that it didn't matter anymore. And yet, the moment she saw him standing in her courtroom, it was like no time had passed at all. She exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. She had worked too hard to get here, to build a life for herself, one that didn't revolve around a man who had left without looking back. But now, he was here, and worse, he was trying to fix things. But did she want them to be fixed? That was the question she didn't have an answer for. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She expected it to be her assistant, maybe another lawyer instead. When she looked up, Alexander was standing there again, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk. You didn't throw anything at me, so I'm assuming I still have a chance. Eleanor rolled her eyes. Unbelievable, I thought you left. He shrugged. Changed my mind. She crossed her arms. What do you want, Alex? His smirk faded slightly, and for the first time since walking back into her life, he looked serious. I know you don't trust me. I know you think I'm just here to stir things up. But I meant what I said earlier. I don't want to walk away again. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign that he was playing a game. But all she saw was sincerity, and it terrified her more than anything else. She sighed, looking away. People don't just change overnight, Alex. I know, he said quietly, but maybe we can start with one night. She hesitated. He was giving her an out. A way to see if there was anything left between them without the pressure of the past. She should say no. She should tell him that she had moved on. But the truth was, when she looked at him, she wasn't so sure anymore. Finally, after what felt like forever, she exhaled, fine. One dinner, nothing more. Alexander grinned, victorious deal. As he turned to leave, Eleanor shook her head, knowing that this was a mistake, knowing that he had always been the one mistake she was never able to resist. And she had a feeling that this time would be no different. The restaurant was quiet, upscale, but not extravagant. Exactly the kind of place Alexander Pierce would pick for a low-pressure conversation that wasn't actually low pressure at all. Eleanor sat across from him, arms crossed, leaning slightly back in her chair, studying him like he was one of the defendants she saw in court every day. Alexander, however, was completely at ease, leaning forward with that same easy charm he had always carried. So tell me, Alex, she said finally, tapping her fingers against the table. Why now? Why, after all these years, do you suddenly care about fixing things? Alexander exhaled, setting down his drink. Because I never stopped caring. Eleanor scoffed, shaking her head. Oh, please, you disappeared for years. You built your empire. You had everything you wanted. And now what you just remembered? I existed. He didn't flinch. You think I forgot you, Eleanor? I never did, not for a second. She stared at him, searching for any trace of dishonesty. But there was none. And that was the worst part. Because if he was lying, she could walk away. But he wasn't. And that made everything so much harder. She sighed, leaning forward a little. Then, why didn't you ever call? Why didn't you ever try, Alexander? hesitated, and for the first time since walking back into her life, he looked guilty because I thought you didn't need me anymore. I thought you were better off without me. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by the rawness in his voice. What? He let out a small, humorless chuckle. I saw you rising through law school. I saw your name in articles I watched from a distance, and every time I thought about reaching out, I told myself you were doing just fine without me, and I didn't want to ruin that. Her chest tightened. You thought I didn't need you, didn't you? She looked away, gripping the edge of the table. She wanted to say yes, wanted to tell him that she had built her life without him and never looked back. But the truth was sitting in front of her, and she couldn't lie to him. You leaving hurt, she admitted softly. I hated you for it. I told myself I would never forgive you, but Alexander leaned in. But what Eleanor's breath hitched, but it still mattered. Silence hung between them, thick with years of unsaid words, of lost time, of unspoken emotions. Alexander reached across the table, hesitantly waiting for her to pull away when she didn't. He took her hand, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I can't change the past, Eleanor, but I'm here now, if you'll let me be Eleanor. Swallowed hard, staring at their hands at the man who had left, but somehow never really let go. She had spent so long pretending he didn't matter that she had convinced herself she had moved on. But now sitting here with him, she knew she never really had. She exhaled slowly, looking up at him, a small, almost hesitant smile on her lips. You always did know how to get your way. Alexander smirked, squeezing her hand only when it matters, and in that moment she knew this was far from over.